So I graduated from college in 2020, and this was during the pandemic. And I graduated with a bachelor's degree in psychology and a minor in neuroscience. I went to a grad school for neuroscience for 2 years, but later dropped out in like late 2021, I think. And ever since, I've been working as a software engineer in a completely unrelated industry and field. As I'm approaching my 4-year anniversary as a software engineer, I realized something. I've never actually benefited financially or career-wise from having a psychology degree specifically, but I really don't regret getting it. And I think that's something a lot of people don't talk about, that a degree can still matter even if it doesn't become your job. Because what that degree actually gave me had nothing to do with jobs per se, and everything to do with how I think, how I handle life, and how I eventually found coding. So why did I major in psychology? I wish that I could say that I grew up always wanting to go to college for psychology and wanted to be this renowned psychologist like Freud or B.F. Skinner, but really I can't. The truth is, like a lot of people, I had no idea what I wanted to do as a career even while I was in college. I grew up in a small town on the north side of Mississippi. Not like that narrows it down much, since it pretty much is only small towns in Mississippi, but still. Most of the common jobs you can get in my town and surrounding areas without nepotism or favoritism were either retail or a factory or warehouse or even nursing homes, most of which, as you can imagine, does not require a degree. And no hate to those jobs at all, though. These are the jobs that most folks in my family have always used to put food on their tables for generations. I've also worked some retail and warehouse jobs back in college, but just trying to give some context to my thought process and my decision to major in psychology in the first place. I was also a first generation student, so it's safe to say I didn't really know anyone personally that had a degree, since most people from my town who did get one had to move out of the area to actually find gainful employment in their respective fields. So the only apparent examples I had of degree holders and their career paths were teachers at my school, but I'd already decided early on that I didn't want to pursue that path, so I wasn't really fully aware of what my options were going into college. I didn't even know what a scholarship was and how to get one, and my guidance counselor wasn't much help either. I just knew that I had pretty decent grades in school because my parents always made sure school was one of my sole focuses. So I wanted to get a degree and hopefully take my then girlfriend, who's now my wife, and leave our hometown in search of better opportunities, and I eventually became the first and only so far in my family to do both. So before I knew it, it was 2016, my senior year in high school. My local community college gathered all the seniors in a cafeteria, as they do every year, and passed around free applications. And on the application, we had to choose our majors, and in hindsight, picking undecided probably was an option, but hindsight is always 2020, and I think my 18-year-old thought process at the time was that I just really wanted to do 4 years undergrad and be done. Picking undecided seemed like it would tack on some more time, so I didn't really want to risk it. So months of agonizing and stress led up to me checking the psychology box as my declared major, but there was a couple of factors that went into this decision. Like I said, I didn't really have much of a feel of what types of careers each major would provide. I mean, I knew their job titles, but I had no one to ask to get a feel of the day-to-day of those jobs. And Google can only take you so far. But one thing that was apparent and drove my curiosity was mental health and the lack of access to it. The South is notorious for neglecting mental health, and I was raised in a pick yourself up by the bootstraps type of family where we don't really communicate our feelings all that well, but for some reason there was always conflict. We never really learned peaceful resolution skills or how to truly relate to each other, even to this day. And I always knew, even as a kid, that it was probably due to a lot of unaddressed, diagnosed, and undiagnosed mental health issues that my family were suffering from. I saw firsthand what that did to families, especially mine. Even though I didn't know much about it yet, psychology felt like a way to understand it all and possibly help. I just wanted to learn more about this thing that felt so taboo where I'm from. People also used to tell me that I give good advice, so becoming a therapist, specifically a marriage and family therapist seemed like the right path at the time. Now, this is a big part of why I don't regret my decision. I was making the best choice I could with the information and the experiences and interests that I had at the time. I genuinely wanted to learn about psychology, and I genuinely wanted to be a therapist. And honestly, that's something we forget when we look back on our past choices. We judge them using the knowledge we have now instead of the knowledge we had then. At 18, curiosity and purpose mattered more to me than salary charts, and that was okay, and it's still okay. So the first semesters of college went pretty well. My classes were fine, I was adjusting, and I felt like I was figuring out things as a first generation student. But during the last semester of my sophomore year, I hit a wall. I realized that I didn't really like psychology as a career. I started off taking mostly general ed classes in my freshman year, but as I took more psychology heavy courses and started getting a real picture of what a therapist, what they study and really did every day, I started to realize that maybe that wasn't what I wanted anymore. I mean, the subject was interesting, don't get me wrong, but most of my classes felt boring, and at the time, that was the only way I knew how to judge a career path. If the classes were boring, the work must be boring too. And to be honest, that was terrifying. The one thing I came to college for suddenly didn't feel right. I was already 2 years in and about to transfer to a 4-year university, and I still had no idea what I actually wanted to do. And as I've been learning, I have anxiety, and uncertainty is not my friend. So this started a downward spiral. I remember I'd go on late night Google binges trying to figure out how I could spin this degree that I'm interested in into a career that I'd actually enjoy. And one night I stayed up almost the entire night and decided to go to one of my instructors at the time's office hours. Now this was 8 a.m. in the morning, and if you went to college, you know how dreadful 8 a.m. classes are, let alone office hours. It's like you're volunteering for punishment. But anyway, she was a really nice teacher, and I felt comfortable enough to confide in her. So I remember barreling into her office almost teary-eyed and half asleep and telling her about my anxiety about my career that I didn't even have yet. I remember she calmed me down, told me about her classmates who became therapists and their experiences, and she even gave me contacts to her friends who worked in the field. Eventually, we settled on a pretty solid plan. Keep going with psychology for a semester or two since it's something that interests me, but don't be afraid to change majors, add a dual major or a minor that I could see myself working in the field as. This was such good advice looking back. It wasn't just quit and start over, which is what I was fearing the most. It was keep going, but adjust as I go. Find out what works for me. Looking back, that experience is another reason I don't really regret my psychology degree. College wasn't just classes. It taught me how to ask for help, build relationships, and find mentors. As a first-gen student, I had to build that support system from scratch, and it honestly carried me through the rest of college and later through grad school and career changes too. And honestly, if I hadn't majored in psychology, I never would have crossed paths with professors like that, the kind of people who changed how I think about my future, who taught me in a real and tangible way the importance of being fluid and not rigid in all of my life's obstacles. So transfer orientation day finally came at the 4-year university, and I'm given a form with check boxes to declare my major and my minor. Of course, I checked psychology as my major. That was part of the plan, but as I scrolled through the list of minors, I saw neuroscience. I didn't really know what it meant beyond study of the brain, but it sounded challenging and honestly exciting and seemed to pair well with psychology. So I checked the box and declared it as my major. That first semester, I set out to take one of the hardest required classes for the psychology major, brain and behavior. It was a course that used neuroscience to explain behavior in the first neuroscience course that I ever took. It was one of the coolest courses I've ever taken as well to this day. I learned about the possibilities of neuroscience, things like optogenetics, a technique used in neuroscience to be able to turns specific neurons on and off using light and genetics in rodents. I remember I'd voluntarily stay for hours in the professor's office hours just asking so many neuroscience related questions about the course and beyond that. I realized I was hooked, and this is where I decided I wanted to be a neuroscientist. All of a sudden my career anxiety lifted and I found purpose again. I spent the next 3 semesters trying to get enough experience to craft a good enough resume to get into a neuroscience PhD program. I joined a pharmacology lab that studied the long-term effects of HIV in the brain, which I thought was pretty interesting. The work was mostly on the cellular level, but had some behavioral elements with mice as well. And during that time, I really threw myself into research. I was going to lab for about 20 hours a week, on top of my full course load and extracurricular activities. I was able to write my honors thesis on the research I conducted in the lab, present in national conferences, and even got my name as a co-author on a published article, which is hard to do as an undergrad. But during my last semester in spring 2020, I was slowly realizing something. I didn't really enjoy the day-to-day grind of research. One thing that my courses didn't prepare me for was how gritty research really is. Usually courses teach about the exciting studies that result in a significant find or a paradigm shift, but in reality it's hundreds or thousands of hours trying to find the diamond in the rough. We were learning about the diamonds, not so much the mining. And I know what you're thinking, I probably should have changed course and not went to grad school, but it wasn't so simple. I think a lot of it had to do with the sunk cost fallacy. I invested so much time and effort into getting ready for grad school in those 4 semesters. I even gave up my summer to do research. I put together a pretty decent resume that got me interviews at a couple of the top neuroscience research programs in the world. I had gotten a full ride too at a university and everything paid for, plus a stipend to live on. It was also during the height of the pandemic, so there was a lot of uncertainty in the job market. I didn't want to risk more time and money to be an undergrad just not to find a job afterwards anyway. And honestly, I still love neuroscience, the theories, the writing, discussions, the conferences. I convinced myself the research part would click eventually. Maybe it was just the lab I was in, so I took the opportunity telling myself, if it doesn't feel right, I can always pivot. And I eventually did just that. 1.5 semesters into grad school, I left. I still love neuroscience to this day, but doing research just wasn't for me. And that's okay, because this time I had a backup. During the last semester of my senior year in college, I took a computer science course. In that course, we learned Java, and I absolutely fell in love with it. So much so that during the 1.5 years of grad school, I was still learning how to code on the weekends and evenings. After I dropped out, I was unemployed for a few months, but early the next year, I finally got a job offer as a software engineer. I was ecstatic. Looking back at those 3 months, they were probably the most stressful time of my life, but I loved every second of it. I'd spend 12 to 15 hours a day learning to code, and I built some pretty cool projects that still get used to this day. And I've been working my dream job for about 4 years now, so looking back, I don't see my psychology degree as a mistake. I see it as a thing that taught me how to think, how to learn, how to ask questions, how to understand people, and honestly, how to change directions without feeling like a failure. All still skills that I use to this day in my career in adulthood. My degree didn't take me straight to my career, but it did give me the confidence and tools to eventually find it. And if you're someone who feels like you chose wrong or that you're stuck with a major that doesn't match your life anymore, maybe it isn't wasted. Maybe it's just a chapter that led you to the next one. That's what it was for me, and I don't really regret it at all.